idea of having the math game, which is very common in this country. People will explain it that way. I never had the math. You heard it in the film. People who set this sense. And what many people from those countries will say is even though they don't necessarily feel they know the math, they do know that if you spend some time at it, put work at it, it won't necessarily be easy, but you can learn. So these are sort of two comments I want to make at this stage. And to me, it sets up this dilemma between a subject matter that has challenges and the sense that everybody can do it. and in some sense almost at the same level. It's not quite the same level, but feel comfortable in doing it at the level they are.
Thank you. Tim.
A couple things I will say. I will say in general, the film really framed math proficiency as a citizenship issue, maybe even beyond like a job prospects issue, which I found really compelling and interesting to think about as a classroom teacher. And like, again, especially calculus students, those are largely seniors and some juniors. I mean, there's a very clear picture in their head of like, I'm in here to go to college, I'm in here for this major, I'm in here for this program, talking those terms. And those were really important and meaningful. But at the same time, like when you think about it, it's like there was very few students who the first thing out of their mouth, even at that point, who have been successful, who have some confidence. It's not I'm here because I'm excited to learn about this mathematical relation, this derivative or this integral, or find out like what is the math of going when things go in rates of change. So I say that, I'm just saying, especially I will say in my current role, thinking more in terms of like rules and laws and policies in the place. Especially at the state and federal level, it's my opinion that math is often talked about in terms of economy. Whatever field, like we need people to work in this field, we need to make sure we have people qualified to do IT, to do whatever, I mean like, you know, kind of AI right now is a big one. And so that's what I mean by saying it's actually a citizenship issue. It's actually an ability for us to talk with each other. It's actually an ability for us to read the newspaper or blog or whatever, or you know, wherever we get our news now. And I find that really interesting. I think that really changes it. It makes it a little more personal. It makes it a little more universal. And I'll also say it's not necessarily the way that especially the bigger parts of the education system think naturally when it comes to thinking about math as an issue. And the second piece that really resonated for me from the film, it was kind of in the middle there, but this notion of math having like these sages or these almost like pastoral feel. For me, that was my feeling. I know it's one of these weird spots where it's talking about, like, I appreciate that David was talking about like, teachers and respect. I personally always felt very deeply respected by my peers and my students and the families I worked with. But I also experienced that piece of, like, even just as simple as, like, going to the dentist's office, the receptionist is like, oh, what do you do? I was like, oh, I'm a math teacher. Like, how in the world? Like, how did you ever, like, just no comprehension of, like, how could you possibly accomplish that? How could you possibly do that? And that always made me a little uncomfortable. It's like I appreciate that you respect me, but on the same front, like it's not a mystical quality. I just like anyone else, I worked hard at trying to be skilled at this. Like a bunch of people have been. You all out here have worked hard to be skilled at something. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's not that it isn't hard. Like they're saying in the film, but it's very doable. And so kind of trying to get past that. Because those are the couple things that really stick out to me.
Thank you. I'm curious to take the temperature of the room. I know a lot of you got emails from the Washington State, I'm going to get it wrong, Council of Teachers? Is that?
Washington State Math Council.
Math Council, yeah. So how many of you here are teachers? Okay, so how about K5 or K8 teachers? How about middle school, high school? How many of you have had children or currently have children in the educational system learning math? Okay, so it looks like a lot of people have been touched by this. And obviously we all had to go through school, so I suppose we've all been exposed that way. What questions do folks in the room have for the panel? Yeah.
I guess with like advancing with advancing technology out there, I'm curious, what are the lessons that people should be focusing on now if they're, I don't know what stage to pick, but now with just technology so accessible, it feels like I can just talk to my phone and say, hey, give me the answer there. So are there like new skills that people should be thinking about learning or concepts that relate to math?
One of them that is being discussed a lot within the math world, and it's also outside of the math world too, it's in education generally, is good prompts. This has very little to do with the actual underlying working of some of these AI systems, but it has to do with asking good questions. This was brought up in the film in one segment about studying math does help you bring up, what are the questions that are good ones to ask. People are talking about teaching students how to ask good prompts. It's a little bit scary because I think there's a possibility here, and I think a lot of people are worried about it, is, what will this replace? We don't know the answer to that yet. That is the artificial intelligence systems can, it can sound like you're talking to a person. You interact with it, and gee, maybe we should just eliminate all the people. The systems talk to each other. That's yet to be seen. I sometimes think of what has happened with the Industrial Revolution, with first steam power and then internal combustion engines and electric power. It's changed the way people do things in lots of ways, but I don't think that anybody at the time had a serious good idea about what was going to happen. But the math can still, as it was mentioned by a number of people who do math work, of asking good questions. Enough of me.
I have a couple thoughts. I think AI scares me for a number of reasons. But I think there's an element of it that is dumbing down society. And if there's an investment in anything, it's the cultivation of what the benefits of math are. For myself, even though I majored in math, it was not until graduate school that I really understood what my calling was. It was the critical thinking, it was the analytical skills, it was deductive reasoning, and all those things inside math. It's easy to get quick answers today. But the fact that quick answers, that people find that as a replacement of all those other skills, and we stop cultivating that, I think we have a real issue.
It's a great question. I don't know if it's a bunch of brand new skills in my head as much as what should be emphasized given that the world we're in. So I'll give a couple examples in here. Bias, I'd start there. That's the number one thing I'm thinking of, is conceptual understanding of bias and how to look for it and how to interrogate. Bias has been a thing for a while, but for instance, saying like, how do AI models work right now? They're large language models. They're fed a ton of data. So what data was fed into it to figure out what it'll spit out? That's an example of just saying, like, if we understand something about that, or we understand to ask that question, we have a better opportunity to understand the limitations of what our large language model will or won't do, or what it's more likely to do. So that's an example. Another one I think of is like, I'll just call it probabilistic thinking, or like probability. Best one I think off the top of my head is if you pull up a weather app, it'll say something like 35% chance of a shower at 8 p.m. That's a probability. And we kind of intuitively understand, like, it's not that 35% of a rain cloud or like 35% of a raindrop is gonna fall down. It's something different, like either it's 100% gonna happen or 100% not gonna happen. But at this point, we don't know how it's gonna go. So our brain's ability to do that, and especially work with really small probabilities and really large probabilities or extreme ends, This tends to be just a really weak spot without some training, without trying to work on it. But the reality is it used to be, I don't know, like 100 years ago, you like look out the window and go, I think it's gonna rain, versus now we have a bunch of data and research and satellite imaging and this kind of thing. It's the same question, but that's what this movie was getting at, was talking about we're all saturated with data that we didn't necessarily have at our fingertips, and we weren't expected to process at the level we are now. And so that's why I mean, those subjects have been there, but perhaps to actually wade through society and make that a useful tool, like they need to be emphasized more.
If I add a comment, I want to make sure, I said it's dumbing down society. I love the possibilities of what AI can do. But I just don't think I hope we don't lose sight of the difference between having information intelligence and being competent. There is a difference.
Thank you. No? Thank you. Other questions? And I think, is this on? Yeah. Okay.
Hi, my name is Bill. I have a question for the panel. In looking at this topic of mathematics education, K through 12, there seems to be a challenge for math teachers in going about teaching math, emphasizing what I consider abstract thinking versus applied thinking. Be interested in knowing what weights would you apply to math, cultivating abstract thinking versus applied thinking. Thank you.
Bill, I assume you're not just interested in my answer of say 3 to 7. No, it is a serious issue, but I had to try to put a little levity into it. A young child, when they start learning things, they learn in a very concrete setting. Right? They count the blocks. Right? They learn the names of shapes. They've got triangles, they've got squares and circles, and things like that. So at the start, I think it has to be, you have to know how the names and the words apply to very specific objects. Then you start learning a few abstract things along the way. And this may be, generally before kindergarten. You learn that if you count the 3 blocks from left to right, and then count them from right to left, you end up with the same name, count of 3 at the end. Things like this. You sort of learn features of these concrete things. And I think later on you learn that 1, as opposed to 1 block, as opposed to 1 penny or 1 dog, it's a little bit abstract already. It's not referring to any. It's not just sort of a. Well, what I might say is it's not just an adjective modifying dog or block or something like that, but it's something that these things have in common when you count them. Now that's an abstraction. You get up into a further abstraction when you go from arithmetic to algebra, because the mathematicians generally will tell you, not always, they won't disagree. That doesn't mean they'll all pull this out immediately, but that when you go to algebra, you're dealing with abstract arithmetic at the start. Algebra 1 is really abstract arithmetic. You're doing arithmetic, but without the actual numbers themselves. You're doing the symbols that stand for the numbers. And there are a lot of steps like this that are sometimes very small and sometimes very big. When you want to know, my point of view is when you want to know enough math for civic engagement for the 21st century, you kind of want to know how to think about good questions to ask, like Talithia Williams. Right? What's the chance of miscarriage? Well, it doubles. That's a different answer in terms of how she wanted to treat it, how any of us would treat it, of it goes from 0.1% to 0.2%. I mean, we react differently to those. And the psychologists, Daniel Kahneman, Tversky, people who've done the work very closely to neuropsychology kind of approaches, will say that we anchor things. That is, if somebody says a number, like 10 million, and I say, oh, this firm had $10 million more in revenue this past year than the year before. What's the meaning of that? How do we interpret that? And it's really helpful to know how big this firm is, because if Google gets $10 million more in revenue in a given year from the previous year, it's a rounding error at most. It doesn't matter if it's talking about things like that. So it tends to build and this sort of net level of, we tend to respond, psychologists tell us we tend to respond to anchoring, namely things we're experiencing. If I had $10 million more in revenue, that's $1 million more in revenue, that's a big difference. So it's context.
I'll start with 50%, but I'm like the kid studying the piranhas. Give me at least 3 weeks to get the answer. I'll probably want a little bit more. But I also think there's a deeper thing that you're getting at with your question, which is really a kind of how to teach and what is meaningful, like something in there. And I will say in general, I think one big tension of our system is trying to decide. There's a lot of research to what Dave is saying. I think even when you think about how you have learned virtually anything, when you have something that's meaningful that you're going towards, or something that you can tie it to that you already know something about, when you're building on things you already know, it just tends to go better. So in that sense, context is really important. On the flip side, we still live in a highly standardized testing environment, particularly in math. And a lot of that stuff is put out in this abstraction, which isn't to say you can't teach within context and teach with real life meaning in these pieces, but there's that. Calculus is still seen as this big college entrance kind of piece, and there's a certain kind of list of things that are assumed that are a part of that experience. And so realizing that there is this tension in here, and that there are some pieces in place that are pretty formalized that tug at it, I guess is what I would say, and that is definitely part of the tension.
Quick thought. So, one, I think there is and will always be a place for both. The film, where it takes me, is do we have instructors, classes, and school districts that are allowed to take the children in that direction that we saw in the film, to take them from applied to abstract, et cetera? That do we have a system of learning that allows that to take place?
Thank you. My name is Klaus Mitchell. I'm a former school administrator from New York. So most of my education is back there. But I have 5 of my grandkids in Tacoma school system. You say questions. How do we develop the questions that we need to answer the question that this film brought up? Starting from how do we get the information of math down to the lowest levels? How do we get the math teachers trained in the right way to engage the students rather than having it, you either get the right answer or you get the wrong answer? But I've had teachers that said that I teach on a curve and a certain number of kids are supposed to fail. And then how do we go further, make sure we ask the question about the teachers of the teachers? My mother, who late in life became a teacher, was a parent and went to school. And while she was in school, the professor was telling her, these things have to happen in the classroom. And she and her friend were saying, that never happens in the classroom. So you've got a professor who's teaching from books, but not from the experience. So what's our next steps? Oh, and one more thing. You mentioned AI. Recently, I saw an article where they asked AI to complete this sentence. Teenagers blank in school? And the answer was teenagers die in school, because that's what it got from the internet.
Thank you. Let's tackle these big questions.
I'll go fast. I will say the number one question off the top of my head that I think we should ask is the teacher way of saying would be enduring understandings, but like what, at the end of 12 years, 13 years in K-12, like what do we want to endure? Like what do we want our students, our future citizens, our future people that take care of us and lead us, what do we want them to remember from math? Like what are those things? Because my guess is it's not the things that we're currently assessing or emphasizing in our larger dialogue.
My thoughts, one is to recognize that the solution is not in the classroom, it's a collaborative process at home, in everyday life. People may have noticed a young lady out there with her little baby walking back and forth. The difference between saying, sweetheart, you made it from one side to the other, to how many steps you took, right? And so I think the question is not only how do we get there in the classroom, how do we get there as a society?
I don't always think in terms of just causality, but there are, positive feedback, or maybe, what's the word I want? Virtuous cycles, and vicious cycles. And it's going to take a good bit of virtuous cycles to go on, and let me say partly why. If you learn sort of rote in a process, that's what you tend to teach. It's very natural, it's the way things work, it's the way you were taught. And even if you decide that maybe I should do something somewhat different, it becomes harder. It becomes, you have to change yourself to some extent. There's also the question about confidence in the material. There are a lot of people in this country who, again, mention this, one of my bugaboos about the country is the view that there's a math mind and there's, some other mind, and you've got one or the other at birth. That can change, but it tends to change with time. And working with teachers, again, there's a debate within the field of education. Well, I don't know if it's within the field of education quite as much, or perhaps more in the country, about how much teaching should be learning from the book and theories of teaching, and how much it should be more an apprenticeship type situation where you're, learning on the job, as it were. I think some things are very hard to teach. I suppose you want to be a basketball player. Somebody said absolutely not. If you're interested in that, you're going to spend a lot of time on the court if you're going to ever get anywhere. You're not going to get it just out of reading books. You've got to apply. And this, I think, pertains to use of mathematics, how you think about it, and so forth. So, to me, the math is, as I said earlier on, the theorems are true. Binomial theorem, a plus b, quantity squared. Some of you may remember that one. A squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So, sorry.
Hold it this way, hold it this way.
Okay, and yes, the teaching is a social and cultural phenomenon. And cultures don't tend to change all that fast. The social arrangements tend to be, complex because of human beings are complex. And our social interaction is complex.
I think we've got another question over here.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Fred Hamill, I'm the Dean of the School of Education here. So part of the Teacher of Teachers community, and thank you for that good question. One of our big jobs is to maintain that connection that you spoke to, so thank you for speaking to that. And I'm thankful to all the educators that are here, and the local math teachers and others that showed up for this conversation. And when I think about the expert panel, I'm also thinking about the experts out here that might have some things to say about the film. I'd love to hear some of your perspectives if we get a moment, like what you see in the film and what resonated for you. And Tim's one of our graduates and someone I'm very proud of for this, who's coming out of this program and serving the community well. My question has to do, I really loved some of the pedagogies we saw in the film. Just want to remind people that Bob Moses did come to this campus and talk about the Algebra Project in 2006, so that dates how long I've been here. And it's pretty powerful, and his work's been something we've shared for a while. So I'm glad he was featured prominently in this film because his work's pretty impressive. But my question has to do with, in my role, one of the most difficult populations to attract into the profession is math teachers. We typically, in the secondary school level, can attract social studies folks, history folks, music folks, English folks, science folks, a little bit less, but math is our probably lowest number of folks who want to teach or choose to teach. And I just wonder and Julie, I'd love to hear your perspective on this too, what you think about it. We clearly from the film, we see how important video, quality pedagogy and well-prepared teachers in math are to this movement or whatever this direction we're moving toward. So how do we address the issue of bringing people into the profession of teaching math?
I mean, I'll answer fast. This is getting my personal opinions, but it's some of the same themes of, well, first of all, I hadn't seen the exact data, but also just in economic terms, the shortage of STEM degrees. So just thinking about job surplus. So it's like, I can go teach or I can go make twice as much in industry, or whatever. So there's that piece of it. Compounded with again, at the state, especially national level, when we talk about math education, it's in terms of job prospects, which I'm not saying that everyone cares about a job, but also, at least my experience in education is that many teachers who really stay and love education, it's about impacting people, it's about citizenship, it's about really impacting lives and being connected with people. And that's a very different motivation than go fill a high needs job. I don't know, teaching is a high needs job, but I don't know if that's making some sense, but that's kind of those two pieces. So as far as attracting people, number one, just making it more accessible, which the film is definitely talking about. That's a generational issue at this point in the United States. And then number two, that citizenship piece. And I think those two can be intertwined. They're distinct, but they can go together. But that's very much a long haul strategy. I mean, it took decades to get to this point. It's not gonna end by Monday, probably. If it does, that'd be pretty cool. But those are some of my thoughts.
I'm not sure I have anything to add because I haven't followed the statistics. I gather that's national. Is that correct, Fred? So nationally, it's very hard to get your math teachers. And it strikes me as one of these cycles that will have to be jumped from being a vicious cycle to be a virtuous cycle. And it's going to take this kind of family feel more comfortable about math. You can be a teacher kind of thing, and also to raise that to some extent. I don't think it's quite the same it was when I was growing up, but there was that line about those who can do, those who can't teach. This is not a good cultural environment to prod people into teaching. Do you still get a lot of that?
Yes.
I'm getting a lot of nods, so.
Yeah, I'll say that without derailing this, there's a lot of unique factors right now. it's a pretty interesting moment as far as national dialogue. I would say teaching in general, no matter what, I would call every area a high need area right now, to be honest. But math's been designated one for, I don't know, my whole career. I've been high needs the whole time, so.
Well said. We've got a battery. Since you asked my opinion, Fred, I'm also curious if students who haven't experienced classrooms in this way, and they maybe experienced classrooms in the reenacted way that was, maybe dry, don't see math teaching as something they want to be doing. And of course, I'm looking at my generation of students right now at Tacoma who went through math over COVID, over Zoom. And so that was probably not the most dynamic environment for learning math. And I think, showing other models for how it can be done, but also, there's also so many constraints, standardized testing. I'm married to a high school math teacher and his life is grading, but he's also very constrained to what he needs to be doing. And so it's hard to implement all these things. Or maybe the district adopts a certain curriculum and then they're like, no, 2 years later, it's a different one. And it's hard to build any momentum in new ways when people just want to go back to what's comfortable, even if it's not maybe as inspiring and is maybe leaving a lot of people out. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Mark Cloud, and just had some questions about, the film seemed like there's a lot about not just education, but society's views of math and things, and seemed to be calling for some changes. So I'm just wondering who's kind of doing that work around here, and then what opportunities, apart from just hanging out at a bar doing math, are there for engaging in that work that members of the community could do?
I will give a plug if I'd like to. Hi, Mark, I haven't seen you for ages. In case you don't know, Seattle has a math museum now, and I'm the executive director of the Seattle Universal Math Museum. So there are plenty of opportunities to do lots of hands-on exploration of mathematics. Love building family community around math, love building community around math. And I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna ask my question, because that was one of the themes that came through this movie, is the importance of community. The spending 2 weeks in your college class getting people to know each other. The introductions for 5 minutes at the beginning so that everybody knows who's in that room when they're doing the algebra project. How likely is it that we, with these issues of how do I get through all the curriculum, how can we make space to build community in every classroom at every level to try and mitigate the math trauma that we seem to inflict upon our students?
I mean, my thought is, I think it goes back to a basic question of what are we producing in math class? And it's not people that can count. It's not, et cetera. It's more than that. To the gentleman's question there is maybe, how do we put a different value statement on math teachers, what we produce? And so, I'll go back to my earlier comment, was not starting out by talking about math, but starting out talking about the value and relevance to your life and what you want to be in career and what you do every day, et cetera, et cetera. Now let me back into why math is important. The question of, it's the old thing, and the old thing of asking the janitor at NASA, what do you do? And he says, I send people to the moon, versus I clean floors. It's the same thing. we need to get different answers from society on what math teachers do.
One thing I would say is, again, this is, starts off like with the sort of commitment of those who are willing to do it in the community. Let me single out now the Rainier Scholars Program. You may have heard of it. It's a summer and year-round program out of school, but the extent that you can do support. Stephanie, right, you want to raise your hand and say she's with the Rainier, not to single you out or anything like that, but she's with the Rainier Scholars Program here in Tacoma. It's a program that's been in Seattle for a long time. Again, Bob Moses' algebra project is mostly out of school, unless there have been some real significant changes since the last time I looked, which was just a couple of years ago. And schools, colleges, for example, can interact well with teachers using summer programs, summer enrichment kind of activities that can go for either students or for teachers. I've run a program here at the University of Puget Sound, started some years ago with some 100 people, summer enrichment program, focused on students who not necessarily consider college material initially. I've done some work with the what's called math teacher circles. That is this mathematical problem solving with you have circle. It's the same content, but it's sort of just different age groups. You can do this stuff with young people. You can do this with the teachers, and there's value added, I think. And it's, again, it's out of school, very much volunteer. And I think this is one of these things that as long as you're willing to not solve the problem by yesterday, you can make progress. So if you look at the influence you may have, and community organizations can have that, work on it that way.
Your mic is
I'll respond to both questions at the same time. First of all, who's doing the work? I hope I'm part of doing the work. I'm confident that there's lots of people in this room doing the work. So I'll start there and doing improvement inside a school district. And I would say as far as building community and bonding, I actually think there's quite a bit of hope there. I'm pretty optimistic towards that. I will say from a state level, I don't want to get into technical details, but bureaucracy basically tries to implement things by making new requirements and new trainings. And so there is stuff around that just didn't used to be there. You can argue how effective those trainings are or aren't, and I'll kind of get to my second piece, but my point is that there is an emphasis on that kind of thing that wasn't necessarily there before. And also as a general rule of thumb, at least in my experience, like teachers really love kids, like really do. So it's not so much trying to convince someone to make a connection, it's about making sure that there's space to do it. And in my role, one thing I get to do is wander around and see different buildings and connect with different people. Like I see connections built every day in math classrooms. So it's not to say it's universal and it's fixed, but I think that's a place for a lot of hope and optimism. Students also self-report growth mindsets at a much higher rate, thinking that their brains are fluid, like whatever they do builds them up, instead of just saying this is case closed. And I do think there is a little bit of a shift in there. Also, there's some interesting research around how that's impacting grades and anxiety, but that's a little bit off the beaten path. But I'm just saying, I think that is the spot where under the hood, there's some real shifts that have taken place, certainly from when I was in school, I think when a lot of us personally went through school. So I'll say that. But the second piece with that, I'll say from like getting to Julia's point there, that bureaucratic level, I do wonder about the coherence of like the reality of saying like, okay, I want to connect with my kids, but you tell them I need to connect while I learn this new grading process, while I learn this new curriculum, while you throw this thing other way, and oh, this license now is expiring in 2 weeks, so I need to figure that out. And student-like conferences are coming up, and so I need to get my grades. And like that's kind of the reality. And so when, like, unless you've got a really strong teacher and or leader, like someone in there that actually helps sift through that and says, you know, cut through the noise and say, actually, this is so important that we will let other things be a little less important. You will not see, I would argue, a system-wide change. It will continue to be bright moments across many different places.
May I add a comment? I also think there is a disproportional, there's a disproportion in our society of things that reinforce that. When I look, especially cross-cultural, when you look at those things in the community that supplement, complement what was just said, the participation is very skewed. And so that's a part of the challenge also.
Taking my bag away?
Well, no, I'll give it back, I promise. We're just, battery's low. I think we're wrapping up at, what time should we wrap up at, or?
Yeah, let's go for that.
No.
You're the facilitator.
Yeah, well, I don't know how long the room's in. Do we have any remaining comments or questions? And again, I think all of us would love to hear from you, since I know many of you are connected to the education system as well.
My name's Dave. I'm not connected to the education system, not a math major. I worked in the corporate world for many years. But as I watched the movie, the thing that touched me, I mean, I think you mentioned the different cultures. Certain cultures really push math and science skills, and other cultures not so much. But how do we get past, I'm not good at math? I mean, just, it's like, it's either, it's very binary. I'm either good or I'm not good at math. How do we get everyone to believe that they can do that? And how do we get the support from parents and family at home to get the kids really pushing themselves? To me, that seems to be like a bigger overall challenge, is getting past that emotional issue of, I just can't do this.
Could I have the luxury of, you wanted to?
Well, I
Go ahead.
kind of build on something some of the other people said. We get students in our program when they're rising fifth graders, and I can say, as much as we deal with the COVID learning loss, and when people think COVID's over, but for the kids who experienced it, it is not. They are coming in with better tools for like self-regulating, naming their feelings. I can tell their teachers work on this idea of growth mindset, that's a part of what they're doing in the schools, because you will hear kids say more, I can, I'll be like, well, what happens if you can't figure out that problem? And they'll be like, well, I could ask someone, I could ask, I forget what it is, it's like, ask 3 before me, their teachers will say. So I can work with someone else, I can try another approach. So there is some of that. But I think when we look at from the film, the percentage of people graduating from high school who are not proficient in math, like for me, that feels like the crisis. And before coming to this program, I was an administrator at an independent school where some of the wealthiest people in this world send their children. And it was still hard to find math teachers. So you can imagine, just to your point of like, what do we do about math teachers? It's a national issue.
Thank you.
I'd like to, I guess, dive down a little bit in terms of the language and what that means. One of the things that I think is really different is to say, I just guess I don't have a math mind, which is to give up. It's another thing to say, I never really figured out that quadratic formula, but I think I can do it. So there's this, I don't want to go over into the, okay, what's 2 + 2? 5. I'm great at math. This sort of positive feeling is not quite the same as distinguishing your ability in it, to be competent in it. And sometimes, and it's actually true among a number of people, you may be good at it, but anxious about it. And you may, I spend a lot of time worrying that I've made a mistake, more than I'd like to, and probably more than I should when I'm working a particular problem. And I think you'll find this sense. And so distinguishing between I'm doing fine and I couldn't do it is to me a distinction that I think is important, not to lose. And being competent about something is important for confidence in that area. Yeah, I didn't get the right answer. That's good. And I got the wrong answer. Oh, I know what mistake I made. I can fix that. Those can go together.
I'll try to go fast. Two things. One, very much on the ground level, and then one kind of higher level. So I'd say from a community angle, just don't ever call a kid smart, which sounds counterintuitive, but hang with me here. Kids are called smart when they get a right answer, particularly in math. So what happens is when a kid gets a wrong answer, their whole identity of being good is gone. And math becomes a performance art instead of a learning opportunity. And that's actually what builds up over time. So it's well-meaning to call a kid smart, but it generally backfires over time. It's a lot of where the anxiety comes from. There's actually some research base behind it now. So if you just want to counter, and don't call them dumb either, but that people already figured that one out. It's actually just as damaging in a backwards way. They actually are two sides of the same coin. So that was, if you want one piece of advice, I'd say that one. Instead, praise a kid's effort or be specific about their actions. So the point of like, you don't just tell a kid, great, 2 + 2 = 5. It's like, how'd you get that? And be like, oh, I really appreciate how you did this, or I really appreciate how you persevered, or wow, you did that really quickly. Could you tell me more about what, so those kind of things. It's not that you just don't give a kid any feedback or don't like really think how cool it is and whatever they did, but just don't stay smart. And then the second one is a bigger picture of like what's happening inside classrooms. I would go back to, again, we're in this really heavy standardized testing environment. And standardized tests on their own, but with the stakes attached to them. I mean, just very early on and frequently enough, there's all these larger messages of like, you are a green kid, yellow kid, or red kid. You are 2 levels behind. Because of that, you're gonna have this whole thing. You saw in the, I don't know all the backstory, but we saw a kid that, don't go to recess because of whatever piece in there. That's just a larger way that we have developed of how to talk about progress in our classrooms. And I think this is one of the consequences. It doesn't help. It's maybe not necessarily the #1 driver, but it's also not helping.
The one thing I was gonna say is helping to overcome this stigma, this I can't, math, I'm not a math person. Is getting children and everyone else to understand you already are. When you are a very timely person, when you are a very reliable person, when you get to class on time after taking 2 buses, you are doing math. You may not be conscious of it. So I think that's a part of chipping away at the fear and this mystique that I can't.
We've got another question from over here.
So my name is Randall Creek. I'm a high school math teacher. And this is more of a comment. People were asking for general people's feedback and thoughts on the movie. I felt it was almost 2 movies in one. One, the issue of math education. How can we better educate our students and get them more inspired? And the second part of the movie was more about, it was raised earlier, this idea of using math to make sort of political decisions. And we've definitely talked about the math education part in the discussion of the panel. And I want to make sure that we all focus on that other part of the movie and using math to some of the crises and issues that we're facing. How do we get, I think of, there's a quote from a great video, Lacrosse Tyson speaking about climate change and frustrated that like, okay, scientists, it's their job to come up with the data and the answers and look at the science of it. It's politicians to make the policy decisions based on that science. It's not politicians to argue which science is, what's the facts or not the facts. Like, so the gerrymandering I thought was a perfect analogy. Here's a political side, neutral sort of issue that mathematicians come up with a solution, sort of like, you can look at how do you decide how much fish to farm out of the river. There's models that seem to effectively optimize how you can have a sustainable food source. In sports, teams used math that's probably the best example I can think of where they're applying statistics and making decisions based on math and statistics in baseball. You know, they was so effective. You had defenses changing the way that they positioned themselves in the field from what was traditionally done. And it was so effective they had to change the rules to not allow them to do that anymore. Like, how can we get society and politicians to stop fighting over the facts, alternative facts, or these kinds of ideas, and use the math? You know, I think that's a really powerful part of the movie that they're trying to get that message to us too. Then, and to have us all to continue to make that fight that, hey, that's what we should be doing is using the skills of the mathematicians and scientists to, here's some solutions then, here's the solutions for a model for COVID or whatnot, like all these issues that are coming up then. So I just want to bring that to the forefront too, the other part of the movie that I thought was pretty effective and powerful, more at the beginning of the movie.
Thank you. Does anybody want to comment or respond to that?
I wish I could give what might be called a more happy or positive answer, but part of this has to do with, in the political realm, people are really fighting over their vision of what life should be like, what's good for me. I mean, you know, one example that I think we all recognize, particularly when there are limited resources, when I was working at the university, my salary was the university's part of the university's expense. Right? The university doesn't have unlimited resources. They can distribute those resources to different elements within the university, and there's just tension there. There need not be a life and death struggle, but there's a tension. And within a society and a group, I don't know of any society of any size where there aren't already tensions between just individual wants, where things are limited. Now, one thing I will say, and I want to go back to this gerrymandering, is the example that came in the film was something called wasted votes. And you saw the formula. I don't want to talk about it very much. But there's another group that's done gerrymandering. This is a group out of Tufts, Moon Duchin. And when she put that together, she made sure she had political scientists and lawyers. Because the issue, say, for lawyers, it was specific in the film. I think it was John Roberts said, how can I justify this? Because the proportion of wasted votes is bigger than 0.7 or something like that. The point that Moon Duchin pushed was we need lawyers to tell us what mathematical structures are more likely to resonate with judges when we're trying to convince them that this is the mathematical piece that we would like to bring to the court. And there are different ones you can use. That is, there are different measures of gerrymandering. And the question is, if you bring an unconvincing measure of gerrymandering to your political leaders or your lawyers, they'll say, gobbledygook to me, and we'll ignore that. But if you bring one that says, yeah, this makes sense, and that's part of the politics of things. I mean, you really have to understand, put it this way, my sense about a lot of things about politics, when you get about 6 or 8 people in a room, you've got a problem, you're likely to have a problem that's more difficult than, doing quantum field theory. Some very deep mathematical, physical ideas. We don't know, we don't have good formulas for people, and learning how to deal with them can be a real challenge. I wish I were more positive, but that's been my experience.
Any remaining comments or questions? Yeah.
And I won't stand because then my butt will be right in front of everybody. So, my name is Mary and I taught high school in Minnesota about 20 years ago. And I got to do Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, and Pre-Calc. And so, my one thought on this whole film is, I do think the struggle here that we need to work on is curriculum and assessment measurement. I think that's what's tying the hands of most teachers. And I think we need to do it from elementary, kindergarten to high school. So the high school teacher is not battling to get this new mindset to kids who are set in the old way. But in this movie, one thing that pulls at me emotionally, yeah, there's that community piece, but it's still that I get concerned about the biases we have with low income and people of color. It's funny, when I went to school, the bias was girls or boys. You know, and my big research was around how girls are treated in mathematics. And I just wonder in Tacoma, because I did all my stuff in Minnesota, what we're doing to kind of level the field when it comes to low income and people of color. And is there anything you can comment on there?
Thank you.
We can connect afterwards. I will be short and sweet, but I would say generally, or else we got teachers here too in the system. Generally, there's an academic acceleration policy in Tacoma that is basically universal. It's an equality-based system of everyone gets the same treatment at major points. So it's lowered barriers, it's taken away friction in kind of those terms, but there's an open question on, are the supports in place to get the full benefit? I'll leave it at that for now. I think you can get some sense of where I'm going with that, but I'll let other folks respond. But if you want specifics on Tacoma to some extent, my job is looking at that stuff.
Listen to Jim.
Short and sweet.
I think it's a good comment. Here's where I go with that. We can have all the rules, regulations, and policies we want, and it comes down to the people implementing and executing. And until we step up and address that, we will have an issue.
I don't have anything to comment on that specifically, but I actually feel really heartened by Stephanie's comment about what you're seeing with the growth mindset and the kids that you're seeing coming in from 5th grade. And I'm also heartened by what Tim had said about the changes that you're trying to work on in the schools, growth mindset and social emotional learning. I mean, my husband's been teaching for about, 15 years now, and he wasn't trained in how to do social emotional learning, but he's in their special tides time they do with their high school, they're starting to do that too, and I think that's really powerful. So I am heartened to see that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that, how I observe that in my students at the university level. Does anybody have any other comments, questions? We're at almost 4:45, so I understand if you need to go to other places, but I think
we can formally end it,
yeah.
but I will hang around here for a minute or two if somebody wants to throw some rotten tomatoes. It's all right, I'll hang around here a little longer. I don't know, I can't speak for the other people. Well,
that's okay. I was trying not to steal the mic and I didn't. Yeah, that's right. Is it on? Anyways, whatever, I'm just gonna yell, I don't know that term. So, me and Patrick and Paula are from Washington State Math Council, so if you're a classroom teacher, we want clock hours for today, we'll be back there. You need to at least sign in today, but you'll have to do like a review and pay and all that kind of stuff as well. So you can do all that, we're ready for it, or just sign in and then we can do it. So, if you need to go, that's fine too. So, we'll meet back by the windows, is that okay, Paula? Sure. Okay, and thank you all for organizing it, Tim, Dave.
Thank you, everybody.
Go ahead, take the credit, that's okay. Not a problem.
Thank you, David, for initiating all this.